What's up, vetters? Today I have an awesome interview for you today. I sat down with Avi Loeb.
When I look up at the sky at night, I see 100 billion stars of the Milky Way galaxy. They look like lights in cabins of a giant spaceship, the Milky Way, sailing through space. And I wonder if there are other passengers in those cabins.
Avi Loeb is an Israeli-American theoretical physicist and cosmologist, best known for his work on black holes, the early universe, and the search for extraterrestrial life.
There are 100 billion of them, comparable to the number of people who ever lived on Earth. It would be arrogant to think otherwise, that we are alone, that we are unique and special. Especially if you read the news every day, we are not the pinnacle of creation. There is room for improvement.
He is a professor at Harvard University, where he serves as the Frank B. Baird Jr. Professor of Science.
I'm just a curious farm boy, and I wonder about the world around me. And I hate to behave like the adults in the room, because they often pretend to know more than we actually know. And that bothered me since I was a young kid. And so I decided to become a scientist and answer the questions based on evidence, not based on prejudice.
Loeb has authored numerous scientific papers and several books, including Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, where he argues that the interstellar object Oumuamua detected in 2017 might be evidence of alien technology.
The first object to have been reported by astronomers that came from outside the solar system looked really weird. It was discovered by a telescope in Hawaii. When it passed close to Earth, it was the size of a football field. What you see behind me is the artist's depiction. It looked really weird because as it was tumbling every 8 hours, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10, which meant that it has a very extreme shape, most likely flat, like a pancake. And moreover, it exhibited a push away from the sun by some mysterious force because there was no evaporation, no cometary tail around it, no dust, no gas. So the question was, what is pushing it?
His bold hypothesis and willingness to challenge conventional thinking have made him a prominent and sometimes controversial figure in the scientific community.
And for 70 years, we've been searching for radio signals. This is equivalent to staying at home and waiting for a phone call that may never come.
He also leads the Galileo project, an initiative to systematically search for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence.
I enjoy nature. Whatever it brings to our doorstep is welcome. So let's just look around.
All right, betters, look who I have in the house, Professor Avi Loeb. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
You may not remember, but I've actually interviewed before on the show. I had a different background. It was a long time ago. It was the very first interview I did on Vetted on my channel, and I've since grown the channel pretty big here in the community, and I'm really excited. And I always refer back to our very first interview. And I know you've done a million of them, so you probably don't remember, but for me, it was amazing. So I just thank you again for taking the time to come on here. I think the Vetted community is going to be really excited to hear from you. So yeah,
Well,
just really excited.
it's great to see you again, and a lot has happened since then. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, yeah, the last time I spoke to you, you hadn't gone out to Papua New Guinea. You were making all these plans to go all this stuff, and I covered everything that you did after all of that stuff came out. But before this interview started, I was thinking, I always like to start with an interesting question, and I thought, how do you feel? Okay, this is the best way. Do you regret at all coming taking the stance you did with Oumuamua that started you on this journey of sort of being part of the UAP community and doing more research into it. Is there any part of you that regrets that?
No, not at all. In fact, it makes my life far more interesting because, we have the Galileo project with 3 additional observatories being planned for the near future. We have the expedition materials that we recovered that we are still analyzing, looking for isotopes. There will be the Rubin Observatory coming in Chile this year and providing us with additional objects like Oumuamua. And I think all of these are exciting because they might provide us with new knowledge about what happens outside the solar system. And, before that, the subject did not rise up to the attention of the public, of the academic community, because we didn't have examples of interstellar objects from outside the solar system. And the traditional way of searching for extraterrestrial civilizations was to wait for radio signals. And that's just like waiting for a phone call at home. If you feel lonely, that's not a very good approach to finding a partner, just waiting for them to call you. When Enrico Fermi said, where is everybody? That's a question that every lonely person asks. And
Sure.
What you tell the person is, that you shouldn't be so pretentious. You shouldn't assume that you are so attractive that everyone will come to you. You should actually search for partners and at the very least look through the windows of your home to see if you have neighbors, or maybe even go outside and look for dating sites. And the point is that Enrico Fermi never constructed a telescope. So for me personally, it opened a new exciting frontier for research, trying to look for objects near the Earth that might be of extraterrestrial technological origin. And that's exciting. And Oumuamua opened my eyes to that opportunity, because before that, we didn't know of any objects that came into the solar system. And moreover, this one was very weird. And of course, what you alluded to is that there is a lot of pushback and people are attacking me personally, but that doesn't affect me because, it's always the case when you have, you're on the quest for something very significant, that people are either jealous of the attention that this search gets, or they have a prejudice and therefore they don't want it to be disrupted by evidence. And we've seen that throughout human history. There's nothing new about it. For me, the exciting aspect is that we have the opportunity now to look for that evidence. And, I'm actually very fortunate to have analyzed Oumuamua in a way that is different than the rest of the scientific community. Because I'll give you another example. There are objects that behave like Oumuamua. They seem to have some additional force acting on them without showing any evidence for cometary evaporation. And my colleagues are calling them, as of recently, dark comets, meaning it's a comet because it's being pushed, but we don't see a cometary tail, so it's dark. And, it's just like calling a koala a monkey without a tail. In this case, it could be a spacecraft. And in fact, there was one such object like that my colleagues on the 2nd of January 2025, they noticed an object near Earth, and they gave it a name as a near Earth object, an asteroid. And turns out that, like 17 hours later, they realized, oh no, this one has the orbital parameters of the Tesla Roadster car that was launched by SpaceX. And so it's not an asteroid, so they retracted that. And the same happened after Oumuamua was discovered. 3 years later, there was another object that was discovered by the same telescope in Hawaii. It was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight, exactly the same as I argued Oumuamua did. And this one ended up being identified as a rocket booster from a launch in 1966. And so there is this tendency of astronomers to look at objects in the sky and always say it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. Yeah. And my point is, we should be open-minded. Around Earth, there is a whole class of objects called empty trash bag objects. These are objects being pushed by reflecting sunlight, and everyone discards them and says, all the astronomers says, even if they behave in a strange way and do some zigzag motion, they say, well, it's being pushed by reflecting sunlight. We don't care about it. It's a broken piece of a satellite. So we call it an empty trash bag object and forget about it. However, when you see Oumuamua behaving as if sunlight is pushing it, no, this is a rock of a type that is very different from what we've seen before, maybe a hydrogen iceberg, maybe a nitrogen iceberg. And I say that's not a honest approach. If you allow one explanation for objects near Earth that are definitely behaving like UAP, you should also allow the same interpretation to other objects that came into the solar system from outside. Because if we produce space trash, other civilizations could have done the same.
Sure.
So to answer your question, I'm actually much more excited about this subject now, despite the pushback, just because that's the scientific way of approaching anomalies. You see something unusual, you try to figure it out. Whereas my colleagues are, they stick to the notion that we should always interpret it in a way that is not consequential. If it's near Earth, it's human-made debris. If it's from outside the solar system, it must be a rock of a type that we've never seen before. And that's not a honest way of approaching anomalies.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you noticed maybe other colleagues who were fearful to sort of talk about it or get into the topic, but now you've seen them get into it because of maybe some groundwork you've laid?
Well, there are members of the Galileo project that joined us as a result of their curiosity. But by and large, the pushback that my approach gets, and that is often a very aggressive pushback where
Sure.
people are just not even following physics the way it should be followed and just making all kinds of assumptions that are not valid. In fact, even this morning, I had to reply to a few emails of that nature. When young people see this pushback, they're really fearful because they want to get a job. And if they get attacked like I am, they would have difficulties finding a job. And so I call it regression to the mean. They basically go into the mainstream and do not deviate from the beaten path because they're worried about their prospects in academia. And I think that's the biggest damage, because people like myself, I'm well established. I can study things that might be risky. And the fact that there is no advocacy or acceptance for multiple views deters young people from innovating, and that's really bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what are your solutions to that? If you
Well,
had control and you could do, you know what I mean? What would you do?
yeah, very simple. Get a flood of data, as much data as possible about these anomalies, such that eventually there will be no simple interpretation. It will not be a hydrogen iceberg or a nitrogen iceberg. We'll have so much data about the next object that looks like Oumuamua that it will be clear what it is, what its nature. And if it happens to be technological in origin, we will know it. So it's really the gray zone where people can be in denial. Well, there isn't enough data, or they don't want to collect data and maintain their views. But as far as I'm concerned, a flood of data, as much data as possible, would be a great blessing. And that includes, interstellar meteors that collide with Earth, came from outside the solar system, and could be a Tesla Roadster car, could be something produced by a more accomplished space entrepreneur than Elon Musk. There must have been some like him or better than him since the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. So that's, I really want more data, and I think it will come. And the only reason that the denial is possible is because the data is not sufficient to conclude. And part of this is because people are not motivated to look for the data because of the pushback. So it's a circular argument, as you can see. And I think it will break in the coming years. I'm trying to do my best with the Galileo project. We hope to go on a second expedition to collect more bigger pieces of the original meteor in the Pacific Ocean. We will build more observatories, altogether 4 of them within year or two, and then there will be data from the Rubin Observatory. And I should say, I also placed a bet. Shortly after the latest elections in the US, Peter Thiel said that nobody should bet against Elon Musk. And the following day, I placed a bet against Elon Musk on Medium.com because he said that we should not go. We should go to Mars. He said, because we are probably alone, and we have to preserve the human species against a single point catastrophe here on Earth. And my argument was that we're probably not alone. There are hundreds of billions of stars like the sun in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and there are trillion galaxies like us, like ours, in the observable volume of the universe. And a substantial fraction of all the stars, at least a few percent of them, have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly the same separation. And so it's very likely that there were plenty of technological civilizations. Most of them died by now because most of the stars formed a few billion years before the sun. And so they went through what we are going through. So, we should just search for any relics they left behind, and these could be in interstellar space. So my bet with Elon Musk was, I'm willing to put 1% of my net worth against 1% of his net worth in a common pool, and then we'll use it to search for objects near Earth that look anomalous. And with $4 billion, his 1%, we should be able to do quite a bit. And if in 10 years we don't find anything, I'm willing to give him another 1% of my net worth. I really think that it's a matter of investing the funds, putting the time and the effort, because without searching, we will not find anything.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that makes absolute sense. Earlier, you were talking about, I want to make sure I heard this correctly because I can't get it out of my head. Something about dark comets or something earlier. Are you saying that we have seen stuff that could be a spaceship out there that we've detected, or we're just not sure, or what? What did I hear?
Well, so the astronomers who talk about it, they found the 14 objects that are being moved around by some unknown force, and they say it's a dark comet because they say that the only force they can think about is cometary evaporation, and it's just possible that we don't see the gases coming out of the comet because the force is relatively weak. It's not a very strong force, and they say maybe we just can't see the tail.
Got it.
But of course, that's what you would say about some technological space trash, that happens to be pushed by reflecting sunlight or has some or has some propulsion of its own. And we don't know much about these objects except that there is some force acting on them. So that's one example. But then there are objects near Earth, many of them that are called empty trash bag objects.
Yeah.
And they are thought to be broken pieces of satellites, but people just don't study them in great detail. And that's on top of the unidentified anomalous phenomena that the US government talks about, that the military reports about, and that the Galileo projects, the observatories that we're building are attempting to detect.
Are you guys working on any of these? Like, how far out is the Galileo project looking at? What's the scope here?
First, I should say the observatories that we are building are very different from traditional astronomical observatories, because in astronomy, very often the telescope looks at a very small part of the sky at any given time.
Okay.
And focusing on distant sources. And what we are doing is looking at the entire sky all the time, and especially focusing on things that fly overhead, that are close to Earth. And within the atmosphere of the Earth, we can see out to about 5 kilometers or so with our infrared cameras. And we also have a visible band camera and a radio sensor and an audio sensor. And then every month we collect data from each observatory. We collect about 100,000 objects in the sky, and we are analyzing it with machine learning tools, trying to see if there is anything that is not familiar, not a airplane, balloon, drone, bird,
Sure.
satellites. And so far we do not have distance information because we just have data from one site. But in the coming months, we hope to have multiple units within each observatory that look at the same object from different directions. If they are separated by a few miles, they can do that, and that will tell us the distance. That's called triangulation. And
Okay, yeah.
so we have one observatory operating at Harvard University. We have two more that should be completed by this summer or summer 2025. And another one that will be constructed a year or two later. And so altogether, we hope to have 4 observatories that monitor the entire sky in 4 locations, one in Massachusetts, another one in Pennsylvania, a third one in Nevada, and the fourth one in Indiana. And that should give us a few million objects every year. And even if 1 in a million of the objects that we monitor happens to be of extraterrestrial origin, that would be a huge breakthrough in science.
Yeah.
Now, the government, they established, as a result of the reports from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, they established an office in the Pentagon called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office.
Yeah, Arrow, right? Yeah,
Arrow, and they just are happy if they identify 97% of the objects. For them, it's great success. But from a scientific point of view, not knowing what a few percent of the objects are is not really satisfactory. Yeah, and
sure.
Because obviously in the sky you have a mixed bag. Most of the objects would be human-made.
Sure. I mean, yeah, or animal. I mean, so we're talking. There must be millions of things flying around every day. I mean, how many things are up in the sky all the? Is it in the millions? You think? I mean, my
well,
God.
it depends. It depends what you count, but we, I mean, I would say, and it depends on over which region of the Earth you're talking about. But
just all the Earth. If we were to like estimate on a daily basis how many things are, off the ground, flying around, whatever it was, a bird, balloon, a plane, a drone, an UAP. I don't know. I mean, are we talking millions across the globe every day up in the sky?
I would say
guess, right?
even more than that. I would say
Probably,
perhaps
yeah.
even a billion if you count everything.
Count birds, right? Especially birds,
if you
right?
include birds. Yeah, exactly. So I would say a billion or more.
I mean, that's crazy. That's
it's
so
crazy.
many. That, and 3% of that is a lot.
Exactly.
So I'm with you. Yeah.
And also they don't have distance measurements for those, so they don't know how fast they actually move, how much they are. So what we are trying to do is bring a scientific rigor into this and get very high quality data. Already we published a paper about 500,000 objects that we analyzed. This was never done before, and we are now entering a new phase where we are analyzing a lot of data. And my hope is that in the coming year or two, we'll have something interesting to report about. I mean, I tell my team that if it's all about statistics, so that, we have hundreds of thousands of objects and we split them into drones, into birds, into airplanes, and so forth. That is not an interesting, exciting paper. If we find just one object that is behaving in a crazy way, that would deserve a paper by itself, and that would be the most exciting result as far as I'm concerned.
Like, let's say you did this for 10 years and, year after year, you don't really find anything anomalous. Would that tell you there's nothing flying around our skies that's actually anonymous, or would you?
Well,
what would you think?
You can translate any such data to an upper limit, basically saying there is less than one object per kilometer squared on Earth per year or per 10 years that is anomalous or not identified, then you can keep pushing the constraint down. It's not clear if we are visited. It's not clear over which period of time would you detect the first one, and how frequently it is and how abundant it is. And so it's like any other search in science. You if you don't find anything, you just put limits. And the question of how long you should do it is really a matter of taste. For example, we had a lecture at a conference that I organized by an experimentalist that is searching for the nature of dark matter. So he is searching for specific types of particles, and basically he invested maybe up to $1 billion by now in detectors for the specific type of particles, weakly interacting massive particles. And he was pushing down the limits on the interaction rate or cross-section. And I asked him, how long will you continue? I mean, you already pushed it by orders of magnitude, and he did that for a couple of decades now. And I said, how much longer will you continue? When will you stop? And he said, as long as I'm funded. But that just shows you, I mean, people are doing that. Scientists are doing that for decades. I'm just saying we haven't done that. And we should do it at least for a decade before we argue that there is nothing.
Sure. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Dr. Loeb, if I were to say the word psionics to you, what does that mean to you?
Well, I need you to say more. In which context?
Well, no, that's an interesting answer, just because that's such a popular term right now in the UAP community, psionics. And I'm taking on a big project about it, to be honest with you, working on a big documentary about psionics and looking into it, working with a production company. And I'm just curious, I'm learning about it, like what this means, because for me, at least how it's being described in the community, psionics is sort of implying the ability for a few different things, meaning like telepathy, telekinesis, some sort of connection with entities that you can make on your own. And they call it C5 as well. And I'm looking into it. I'm going to be trying it myself and sort of documenting that process. And I don't know, I'm just curious what you think of stuff like that.
Well, there is a long history of also governments trying to get a sense whether that is something they can employ. And it's probably the study of it has a history of about 70 years or so. But I'm not sure how reliable. I mean, people talk about experiences that allow them to communicate through their brain and know about things that otherwise they shouldn't have known about. And at this point, most of the reports are anecdotal and not. If such people are able to have powers that are far beyond what can be explained, they should be able to demonstrate that in a way that everyone accepts, and haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I agree. I'm just beginning the journey, to be honest. With that, are there any other aspects of the phenomena that are sort of hard for you to wrap your head around? Or maybe not. That's the wrong way to put it. But like, I'm sure jumping into this at the beginning with the Muamua, you get introduced to the UAP community, and I'm sure you start to hear all kinds of things, right? Interdimensional, time travel, they're this, they're that, they're 8 species, there's this happening, the telepathy and psionics and all this. Like, are there other things that you're just like, that's, I don't know, you just want to keep your hands up? I don't know. I'm just curious, like from your angle.
No, I'm completely open-minded. My point is that the only way to make progress is by collecting evidence that is beyond any doubt. It's just like a detective story. If someone tells you stories about what happens and so forth, you want to see the evidence. You want to see the data. That's the only way by which we can make progress and make it part of our knowledge base. And that's the way science is done. And That's the way we can convince skeptics. So I'm trying to bring it forward by collecting data, and that's with the Galileo Project observatories, with the Rubin Observatory in Chile that will find more objects like Oumuamua in the coming year, and hopefully, and with expeditions like the one to the Pacific Ocean. So once we find tangible evidence that cannot be denied, then I think the big change will happen. Then in fact, after that, people would say, we always believed in that. We always thought it's reasonable. In fact, we were the ones to say that. And so in order to
So
make
true.
this transition, you need, for example, if I go to the Pacific Ocean and find a gadget from an interstellar origin that is not human-made, and it has buttons on it, then I think it will be obvious to beyond any reasonable doubt. If we take pictures of objects that are moving so fast that humans could not have made them, and we make it clear by knowing the distances that they are not natural objects or technological from Earth, then I think that kind of evidence will have to be accepted by everyone. And then the question is, what are they and what are they doing? And then one can put more resources towards the study. So I'm really happy that the Galileo project is well funded for the immediate future. We don't have funding for the next expedition, where we want to use a robot to find bigger pieces of the first recognized interstellar meteor in the Pacific Ocean. So on that front, I'm still waiting to receive funding at a few $1 million. But the observatories are now on their way, and we need more people to analyze the data. So that is another need that I hope to get funded for. And I think the public is very excited about what we are doing. So we received very generous donations. And that makes the Galileo project different than many other initiatives that are trying to discuss UAP.
Sure.
I mean, we are following the scientific approach and building observatories and going on an expedition, and we are doing everything we can to collect evidence.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love your approach. I mean, it's for me, it's so easy to support what you're doing. I for someone like yourself, I never understand the pushback. For honestly, like your approach is so reasonable. I just don't understand it. But
Yeah, I mean, the way I think of it is, why should the common sense be controversial? I mean,
I agree.
especially in academia. I mean, I think what happens is that people who are mainstream scientists, they just want to make whatever they discuss not so consequential. They don't want to put skin into the game. They don't want it to be risky or to be extremely important. So whatever they see in the sky, they identify, oh, it's just, there must be a simple reason to explain it, and let's move on and forget about it. And that's their approach, which is very unfortunate, because then, it's just like the people who stay lonely forever, that they don't find a partner, are those that do not realize that their potential partners are just in front of them. You just need to interact, to collect the evidence and interact with it in a way that allows you to learn something new. But if you are always refusing to learn, then you will never learn.
Yeah. What's funny is the moment it becomes an accepted truth, through the scientific community, through the world, we're not alone. We've been visited. That will start the greatest scientific movement in history. Every scientist would want to be studying that, what's going on with it
Exactly.
immediately. And you know what I mean? But until then, hands off. Don't even get near it. Let someone else do the work and get us to that point, and then I'll join the fight, which is so interesting.
Yeah, but it also implies that if nobody will do it, we could be hundreds of years from now and completely ignorant about this subject just because it was never studied. So hopefully we'll find tangible evidence in the coming years. It's possible the US government has some data that is of great interest or materials, and I really hope they will share it with scientists like myself, so that it will save me time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they keep it under wraps, partly because if they're not sure what it means, they prefer not to show their weakness in finding things that they don't fully understand. And
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
so and also they are using sensors that are classified, and they prefer not to expose the capabilities of the sensors.
Sure. I saw on Twitter something. I mean, that's never a good way to start a sentence, but I saw on Twitter a video or something talking about how you had recently spoken with David Grush or something. Is
Yes,
that
I think.
is that true? Like,
Yeah,
do you speak to him like about, you know, like what's going on in the government? Like, do we really have these craft? Do we really have these bodies? Because I don't know how far you actually believe that, or you're just open to that fact still, or
yeah.
where do you say? Yeah,
So my conversation with him was simply to figure out what kind of evidence did he encounter.
yeah,
Because obviously part of what he was testifying about is hearing about a project for retrieval and reverse engineering
yeah,
of material from crash sites. But I just wanted him to tell me specific details about what is out there. And he declined from giving me any specific details because he said it will put him in trouble. And I said, well, this could change the future of humanity if we knew that we have a neighbor, and you could be the Snowden of UAP if you just reveal what, like at your own risk. Don't you think it's a big message to deliver to humanity, worth the risk? I mean, if I knew that we are being visited for sure by extraterrestrials, I wouldn't mind going to jail and just telling everyone what I know.
that's
But he said
interesting.
no, he is worried about it, and therefore he signed on various non-disclosure agreements. He cannot really reveal the information. So that was a bit of a disappointment for
Sure.
me, because I have no clue to substantiate. I mean, I really think that he's sincere, saying whatever he believes in. I don't think
Yeah,
he is trying to manipulate us. And the same is true for other people who testified under oath in the Congress. I think they are fully sincere, but it's really that we want to see the tangible evidence. That's the key, because forget about these discussions in Congress. Just if we see the actual data or materials or something that nobody can deny,
yeah,
and it looks fully convincing, then we know that there is something behind it. Otherwise, I can imagine a scenario that I can just mention, that there is an office in government that is about retrieval and reverse engineering, but it's all about crash sites of equipment from adversarial nations. So if
yeah,
a helicopter falls in our territory from another nation, we want to check what are the devices that it contains. And so we would have a unit going to the crash site and collecting materials, trying to figure out. And it's possible that over the years we collected materials that are very interesting from crash sites that represent technologies that we don't possess, but our adversarial nations possess, that other nations develop. And then you would have this, you would not want to tell the public that such things are really related to other nations. You would try to introduce a false narrative within the bureaucracy of government. Oh,
yeah.
it's extraterrestrials. It's like trying to make to sort of spread the incorrect rumors about.
Throw the scent off, right?
Yeah,
Throw the scent off. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, something to mislead. Whoever
yeah.
learns about the details would be misled, because we discredit
Sure,
the subject. And so I
sure.
can imagine a situation where someone like Grush would be informed about extraterrestrial equipment, just because those who tell him that prefer to keep it under wraps, and just give it sort of a title or context that is completely out of this world. Instead of it being actually something that the Russians developed that we haven't used yet and never learned
Sure.
about. And so, in order for me to tell the difference between that situation and a situation where they really have an extraterrestrial craft in their possession, I have to see the actual craft. I have to see any evidence that is clear.
Sure.
And without that, I don't know. I cannot tell the difference between the two scenarios that I just described.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes perfect sense. You know, this may be hard for you because you're very, well, you're a scientist, an esteemed scientist at that. But regular folks like myself like to use what we call the gut check, the BS meter, right? Just kind of because we're not very smart. I'm not very smart. So I just like my intuition. What does my intuition tell me just based off my experience? And I think, let's say, Dr. Loeb, you're sitting on your front porch with your best friend having a beer. There's no cameras. There's no talking. He just looks over. What's your gut tell you, Dr. Loeb? Do we have these crap? Like, what do you say? What does your gut tell you about this?
I would say it's possible because there are reports, some of them from government, and I at least know as an astronomer that there are anomalous objects that we have seen from interstellar space. So I would say let's nail it. It's not a matter of belief. This is not a religion. This is not supposed to be something that you are indoctrinated into, that you belong to a cult that believes in something. That's not what it's supposed to be. We're talking about objects or entities that appear and might be of extraterrestrial origin. So if that's the case, we should be able to figure them out. We should be able to collect better data, find them, and nail the nature of these mysterious objects. So I would say this just motivates me and excites me to find out what they are. And if we go out and check and it turns out to be human-made or natural from Earth, so be it. At least we learned something.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever heard of a gentleman named Tim Taylor?
No.
You ever heard that name before? You've heard of Diana Pasulka?
Yes.
So she wrote a book, American Cosmic, where she included someone named Tyler D in the book. Well, that has come out since that person, his name is Timothy Taylor, and he's a NASA mission scientist, among other things. And he's got some peculiar, he studied Chris Bledsoe. He claims to get these sort of download protocols from the others, whatever we're calling them, where he gets, ideas and thoughts, and that's how he does his work, and builds companies and works with NASA and all of this stuff. And I'm just curious, like someone like yourself, like, what do you think about something like that? Like people in NASA doing things like that, like, would that bother you? Is it strange?
Well, I would
know.
like to know more about it. So if someone would give me the information, I will be very interested. See, I'm curious, but I really want to see tangible evidence that there is something really unusual there. That there was a panel that NASA appointed as a result of me contacting them, and that panel basically said that more science should be put into the search about the nature of UAP, and that's practically what the Galileo project is doing. So we didn't make much progress with NASA deciding to look into this themselves. They didn't establish a funding path for UAP research, and that was disappointing. So instead of relying on government doing the right thing, I think we should do it ourselves, and that's what the Galileo project is doing.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes total sense. So you're saying that NASA panel that they had sort of announced about UAPs was because you had sent them a message or something?
What happened was that the previous NASA administrator, Nelson, announced that this
Bill Nelson, is that right?
Bill Nelson, yeah. He said that as a senator, he was briefed confidentially about UAP, and therefore he thinks it's a subject that deserves a lot of attention. And he said that about a month before the first report was delivered by the Director of National Intelligence to the US Congress. And a day after he made that statement, I contacted the Director for Science in NASA under him, and Thomas Zurbuchen, and I said, I'm here to help you figure it out, if you want to look into this. And Thomas said, why don't you send me a white paper describing what needs to be done? And I submitted a white paper in which I described scientifically, that a committee should be established, and then there should be research. That was a white paper that he received from me and never responded to. And as a result, a month later, I announced the Galileo project. And then a year later, suddenly he announced the establishment of a committee. So I approached him and said, well, you are establishing the committee based on what I told you. Why didn't you include me on the committee? And he said, well, because now you are engaged with the Galileo project, and I want the committee members to not be biased about the need to investigate this subject. So it's just like saying we need to study global warming or climate change, but anyone that was interested in studying it in the past should not be part of the committee. Like, what is that? Makes no sense.
I agree. That doesn't make any
at any
sense.
event, the committee took a year to come out with a report. And at the end of that, which was 2 years after I approached Thomas Zurbuchen, 2 years later, they recommended to look into the subject scientifically. And that was 2 years into the Galileo project, which is exactly what I'm doing. So it ended up being just a completely useless recommendation, because they established a small office within NASA, which is led by a non-scientist that is just a liaison for transferring data directly to the Pentagon. So the way I understood it is, if there is anything that is anomalous, just send the data from NASA to the Pentagon, because it may be related to adversarial nations doing something. And so that was the end of it. That was the bottom line of this interaction that they had.
Yeah, well, that's so fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I think your approach and what other people are doing that are handling this privately is definitely the best way. Would you say that the Galileo project is the single biggest organization studying UAP right now worldwide?
It's definitely the best funded, because we are receiving funding for all these observatories we're building. We are collecting more data than anyone. Already we have a few million objects that we looked at from one site in Massachusetts. But what I'm saying is we will have altogether 4 of them. So every year we'll have a few million, and so eventually it will be the biggest data set ever of objects near Earth, and also the one that is studied with machine learning in a systematic way. Then part of the data I hope to share with the public so they can look into it. And I think it will be very exciting once we have huge amounts of data coming along the way. You see, other organizations either are relying on anecdotal reports or a few days where they went somewhere and looked around, or things that were collected over the decades. But I think collecting new data has the power that you can have much better quality, and you can check it. If you see something unusual at a particular site, you can look there for an extended period of time and try to figure it out. And so if you look at past reports from decades ago, you have no way of visiting those events again because they were so long ago. So in that sense, we are very different. I'm not aware of another project that is scientifically oriented for a very long-term data assembly like we are. We are basically just like any other astronomical, research observatory, except we will build multiple observatories for the same goal.
Last question here, Dr. Loeb. If you had unlimited budget and resources, how would you approach this?
Oh, yeah. So that was the basis for my bet with Elon Musk, which I mean, I think that we should invest billions of dollars in that kind of research. And I have very clear ideas about what needs to be done. I mean, obviously, the more observatories we can spread around the globe, the better. I mean, if we have
Sure.
100, then we'll have, like we could have a
How
billion.
big are these observatories, by the way? Like when you say that, I imagine something out of like James Bond, just this
No, no,
huge
no.
thing.
They're
Like,
not so big. They are
okay,
about 10 meters by 10 meters that have multiple instruments spread around. But they do cost $1 to $2 million each if you want
wow,
triangulation. So,
sure,
um, so if there were hundreds of those, that would actually give us a lot of data on hundreds of millions of objects every year that we can monitor and see what's going on. And the more sites we visit, the better is the knowledge that we have of what might be anomalous. And but aside from that, I developed a concept for a space telescope that would search for interstellar objects close to the sun. The sun is the lamppost that illuminates the darkness of space.
wow,
So it's
love that.
easier to check for your keys under the lamppost. So I calculated that every 5 hours there is a new interstellar object, roughly the size of a person, that enters the orbit of Mercury around the sun, which is about 3 times closer to the sun than the Earth is. And that is close enough so that every object that gets there is heated to 600 degrees Kelvin above absolute zero. And in principle, some objects might evaporate, and then you could study the composition without even landing on them or bringing them to Earth.
Wow,
Because you can look at the evaporated gases and figure out their composition. And so there is a possibility of building a space telescope that would search for such interstellar objects within the orbit of the Earth around the sun. At every given time, there are a million such objects. Right now, it's just that the Earth
wow,
collides with one of them once per decade. So it's rare to see a meteor. But if we had a powerful telescope that can search for these meter-sized interstellar objects, we might find technological debris among the rocks that came into the solar system from outside. And I think we should do that. So if I had the billions of dollars, I would definitely fund the space telescope targeting all the objects within the orbit of the Earth around the sun.
wow. I love it. Well, if someone can give you these billions, they should. Don't give it to me because I would spend it on yachts and Ferraris, I think. Well,
No,
look,
I,
Dr.
I
Love,
don't need that.
right? Yeah.
My lifestyle is very simple.
Yeah.
I
Mine is
eat.
too. I don't know why I said that. I'm not even into those things.
But
Look,
yeah,
thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Loeb. This was so fascinating. I really appreciate. I know you're a busy man, doing a lot out there, and I and many people in this community support exactly the type of work that you're doing, and just thank you for doing what you do.
well, thanks for having me. And by the way, I received a month ago a sculpture of Galileo, a bronze sculpture by the most accomplished sculptor in the US, Greg Wyatt. And it's in my office. I'm very proud of that. So the work
Wow.
inspires artists. And I'm actually supposed to meet a group of celebrities and the most accomplished CEOs in the world in a month to give them a talk about the Galileo project. And in a week, I'm supposed to visit Richard Branson at Necker Island to also.
Wow.
So it's interesting. There are lots of people who might be interested in the results. If we get something exciting, I will be glad to speak with you again.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Well, best of luck on all that. I know you're going to crush it. I think even though the stigma still exists, I think that there are more and more doors and windows opening for people willing to get into it, right? It's
Right.
not as much there, and they're willing to at least have meetings or talks or see what's up. And yeah, there's some progress at least. So
Yeah, I mean,
and,
anyone interested, I mean, there will be a Netflix documentary coming out in a year about my expedition to the Pacific Ocean. There
oh,
was
really?
yeah,
Oh,
and I
wow.
had a TED talk that I gave that was publicized about half a year ago that
Yeah.
was ranked number 5 among all TED talks of 2024. So anyone
Wow.
interested can
Definitely.
watch.
I'll put links in the description for that. Well, I look forward to that Netflix documentary. That is going to be sick. Yeah, man, there's just really, Dr. Loeb, there's just nobody like you out there doing this. That's true. You are this like unique person looking into this. And I just thank you for all the work you're putting in. So again, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.